Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today we don't have an unboxing, but we do have an unzipping. So this is a guitar that I picked up locally, and for those of you who don't know, I live in Utah, and there's quite a few large cities in the northern Utah area with a lot of musicians, so it's a pretty good marketplace for used equipment for the most part. I typically say if you can't find it on Reverb or eBay, then chances are you can find it here on the local marketplace. Unless you're looking for something super obscure or unique, then you probably won't. But if you're looking for just a good general array of quality instruments, then this is the place. But what do we have here? So this is a case. This is a gig bag that says Cases or Cases. I don't know what K-A-C-E-S 3 is, but that's the brand here. It's got a nice zipper pocket and nothing else, just a couple straps on the back. So that's our gig bag. This is not the bag or case which this guitar came with originally, from what I can tell, but let's go ahead and see what's in here. All right, so this is an Ibanez. This is my very first Ibanez electric guitar. And it's not my first Ibanez guitar because I do have an acoustic Ibanez that my wife Gabby bought for me, and I love that guitar. It plays like butter. It's just such a nice playing guitar. I also have very expensive acoustic guitars that were kind of handed down to me from my father, and I hate playing them because for whatever reason they just play really, really hard. They're hard to play, and my dad was a carpenter, so he had very strong fingers, I guess, and he wanted a guitar he had to wrestle. But I want one that you can slink around and really generally enjoy and play easily. And the Ibanez acoustic guitar is that in spades. So we're not here to talk about that. We will get to it in its own video at some point, but for now, I just picked this thing up and I'm really excited about it. And there's a chance that it's going to leave my hands here pretty soon. We'll get to that, but I want to talk about this guitar in this video. So, what is this Ibanez guitar? It is the S-Classic, and the S in this case, you might think, oh, it's a Stratocaster, S-type, which is kind of what I did initially, but that's not the case. They actually have a body type called the Sabre, and this is an Ibanez licensed body. I don't know if they still produce the Sabre model, but they had the Sabre model early on, and apparently this is reminiscent of that shape. It's also very reminiscent of a Stratocaster, so I would imagine the S name is no coincidence. So anyway, this is the S-Classic SC420. 420. So that is the model number, and it also has a color designation, BC. So it's kind of an unwieldy name, the Ibanez S-Classic SC420 BC. But if you know anything about Ibanez, then you know that their names are mostly numeric, kind of just long-ass, nonsensical patterns of numbers and letters. So that's par for the course. But the reason I bought this guitar, well, there's a couple different reasons. Number one, I've been looking for a Japanese Ibanez for a while, and I don't know why. I just, for whatever reason, I've seen a few videos and heard them played by other people, and they're very, very good guitars, these Japanese Ibanez, and they are made in the Fujigen factory, I believe, or however you pronounce that, Fujigen? I'm not 100% sure. But it's a very well-renowned Japanese manufacturer of instruments. And I believe they also make other non-Ibanez products in that Fujigen factory, but I'm not an expert on that era of guitars. So I'm looking to learn a lot more about it, and this is kind of my first foray into it. The other reason that I bought this particular guitar is because after, well, number one, it came for sale locally, and it stayed for sale long enough for me to do a little research on it, because it's probably a 97, 98, 99 guitar. We're going to find out today. I don't have a way of knowing by the serial number from what I can tell, but I do think there is a date stamped in the neck pocket. So this guitar, over 20 years old, and you know, they discontinued it in 2003. So I don't want to go too much over the history now because we're going to tear this thing apart and have plenty of time to talk about that. But It ran from 97 to 2003, so only 6 years really. And you might find some outliers like a late 96 or an early 2004, but for the most part 07 to 03 is where you find this SC420 model. And it's kind of an outlier for a lot of reasons. I think most people in the late 90s would associate Ibanez with a few different people. Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, and then much later in the 90s, Korn. Both of those guys played Ibanez 7 strings and kind of put that on the map. But all of those players are known for just crazy guitar effects. They're not straightforward like blues players or just Eric Clapton style players. They all use the guitar in a very unique way. And as a result, it's kind of cultivated its own specs. Like you'll find much flatter radius fretboards on Ibanez for the most part, much skinnier necks. You'll find some sort of tremolo or a Floyd Rose in a lot of cases. And you'll see some interesting things like the 7-string and the multi-scale, which develops later on. But this guitar is really none of that. It's a very classic, S-Classic style of build. And I think you can kind of liken it to a few different guitars, but in the end, it's its own beast, and it's very unique, and it sounds very unique. And I took it over to my friend Steve's this weekend and played it, and he played it and just fell in love with it. So it might be moving on to him. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see. But in any event, you have a stop tail piece, so no whammy bar, nothing to induce bend other than your bending of the strings themselves. We have 2 humbuckers, standard, and volume and a tone. 5-way switch, input jack. So very simple rocker guitar. And we do have binding here, or do we? It's actually faux binding. What you're seeing there is just the mahogany that they masked off and didn't paint. So that's a faux binding effect. And when you kind of get acquainted with this guitar, it kind of reminds you of a few things if you've played a few different guitars. And the very first thing that comes to mind is PRS for me. And I think this headstock alone speaks to the fact that they're trying to mimic a PRS headstock. I just so happen to have a PRS guitar, my McCarty 594. This is not the perfect representation of the PRS guitars because it does have that weird 24.95 inch scale length. And this guitar here has the more PRS-esque scale length of 25.1 inch. It's in between the scale length of the Gibson at the 24.5 and the Fender 25.5 or whatever they are. I can't remember exactly, but you think of Gibson in the 24, Fender in the 25, PRS right around 25.1. Very bizarre scale length on paper, but Paul Reed Smith has, for whatever, stuck to his guns on that, and most of their range of guitars has that scale length. Like I said, this one doesn't. Outlier, but it's there's a whole history here with Ted McCarty and his Gibson lineage with 24.5 inch scale guitars. But anyway, look at the headstock and tell me that they're not trying to go for something PRS. We have 6 straight pull strings. There's no bend on either of these. The cutaway goes the different way, but you can kind of see the similarities. And from the back, I don't know, here, actually, let's do it this way. I think this is probably a better comparison. You can see that we have pretty similar looking headstocks in that regard. But beyond that, I would say this faux binding is also a PRS trait. It's not on this McCarty 594, just because this body shape does not have an option for that, but it's kind of a PRS thing with their maple caps. Whenever they have a maple cap, they'll let that be the binding instead of actually adding a plastic purfling edge. It's a stylistic choice, but very PRS. Another thing that you'll notice here is we have recessed knobs. Both of these knobs are just drilled right in, and they have a very unique way of wiring them. I'm looking forward to tearing this apart because look on the back. We only get one small little circular control panel for 2 knobs. So all of the wiring is stuffed in this oversized cavity here, and they have a clever way of covering it up. Otherwise, we get Strat vibes when we have a angled output jack for your lead. So it's just drilled right in there. There's no chrome insert that they put on top of it like a Stratocaster, but that's something that harkens to the Strat in my mind. And other than that, beyond the shape being semi-Strat-like, it's kind of the end of where the Stratocaster comes into mind with a comparison for this guitar. I know that PRS is known for its dual humbucker layout, but I think that they owe that lineage to Gibson more than anything. So there's really a through line when it comes to guitar building history, and it goes through Fender, through Gibson, through Gretsch, all of those classic builders of the 50s and 60s, and then PRS kind of reinvigorates the American guitar building market in the 80s, and then that triggers companies like Ibanez and Gibson to reply in kind with models that are much more similar to PRS than the two core lineups of either brand. So PRS really makes a huge imprint starting in 1988, mind you. This guitar developed in 1997, less than 10 years. Paul Reed Smith made that big of an impact on the guitar market to influence giant makers like Ibanez and Gibson to come out with models that kind of mimic those specs. And one of the coolest things about this guitar is the carve. This is something that you associate with Gibson and PRS, is a carved top, but this is unique to Ibanez. I have never seen a carve like this. It comes to very thin, slender edges on the ridge, on the edge, and then it's quite thick in the middle, maybe up to 1.5 inches thick in the thickest part of the guitar. So where the tone wood is, it's got chunk and it's got heft, and on the edges, they bevel it on both sides so that your weight is less. You have a much lighter guitar. You still have the beauty of a nice belly carve, and it's unique. It's kind of stunning when you pick it up and look at it and feel how light it is and see how they achieve that. So I know you want to hear what this thing sounds like. It sounds great, let me just tell you, but I cannot stand how filthy it is. This is one of the dirtier guitars that I've ever received, and I bought it locally, so it's probably just been gigged in a local bar for, I don't know, 20 years. Hard to say, but either way, it's filthy. It does have this beautiful little cigarette burn on the back. Just gives it that extra character. Luckily, it doesn't obscure the serial number. It's still there. It says made in Japan. And other than that, we got a small ding here and there. One that goes through the, looks like that one was touched up, went through the clear coat here. And then there's a larger one here where it goes right through the paint to the mahogany wood. Luckily, it's on the back. You don't see it, but it's an honest Playware type chip, and I don't think it takes away from this guitar in any way. So before we play it, let's go ahead and clean it up. I'd like to take a look under the hood at these electronics and see if we can't take this apart and decipher if we have a date code in this neck pocket like the forums say we should. So let's go ahead and get this on the bench and take it apart.